China's latest AI breakthrough has leapfrogged the world. What took Google and OpenAI years and hundreds of millions of dollars to build, DeepSeek says took it just 2 months and less than $6 million.
They have the best open source model, and all the American developers are building on that.
Google and Character AI. 3 of the biggest tech companies swallowing 3 of the biggest startups in the AI world without actually acquiring them. A playbook that Microsoft pioneered. In March, it inked an unusual deal with Inflection, a prominent AI startup with a chatbot to rival ChatGPT's. In June, Amazon and Adept AI struck a deal. Amazon reportedly paid at least $330 million to license Adept's technology, with a $100 million retention bonus to employees who jumped ship.
Bipedal humanoid robots using semantic intelligence, it's able to interpret commands from people and then make its own decisions about how to act. Robots like this one are catching the attention and billions of investment dollars from big tech companies like Amazon, Google, Nvidia, and Microsoft. Elon Musk is betting the future of Tesla on these machines.
China's latest AI breakthrough has leapfrogged the world.
I think we should take the development out of China very, very seriously.
A game-changing move that does not come from OpenAI, Google, or Meta.
There is a new model that has all of the valley buzzing.
But from a Chinese lab called DeepSeek.
It's opened a lot of eyes of what is actually happening in AI in China.
What took Google and OpenAI years and hundreds of millions of dollars to build, DeepSeek says took it just 2 months and less than $6 million.
They have the best open source model, and all the American developers are building on that.
I'm Deirdre Bosa with the Tech Check Take, China's AI breakthrough. It was a technological leap that shocked Silicon Valley. A newly unveiled, free, open source AI model that beat some of the most powerful ones on the market. But it wasn't a new launch from OpenAI or model announcement from Anthropic. This one was built in the East by a Chinese research lab called DeepSeek. And the details behind its development stunned top AI researchers here in the US. First, the cost. The AI lab reportedly spent just $5.6 million to build DeepSeek version 3. Compare that to OpenAI, which is spending $5 billion a year. And Google, which expects capital expenditures in 2024 to soar to over $50 billion. And then there's Microsoft that shelled out more than $13 billion just to invest in OpenAI. But even more stunning, how DeepSeek's scrappier model was able to outperform the lavishly funded American ones.
To see the DeepSeek new model, it's super impressive in terms of both how they have really effectively done an open source model that does what is this inference time compute, and it's super compute efficient.
It beat Meta's Llama, OpenAI's GPT-4o, and Anthropic's Claude Sonnet 3.5 on accuracy on wide-ranging tests, a subset of 500 math problems, an AI math evaluation, coding competitions, and a test of spotting and fixing bugs in code. Quickly following that up with a new reasoning model called R1, which just as easily outperformed OpenAI's cutting-edge O1 in some of those third-party tests.
Today, we released Humanity's Last Exam, which is a new evaluation or benchmark of AI models that we produced by getting math, physics, biology, chemistry professors to provide the hardest questions they could possibly imagine. DeepSeek, which is the leading Chinese AI lab, their model is actually the top performing, or roughly on par with the best American models.
They accomplished all that despite the strict semiconductor restrictions that the US government has imposed on China, which has essentially shackled them out of computing power. Washington has drawn a hard line against China in the AI race, cutting the country off from receiving America's most powerful chips like Nvidia's H100 GPUs. Those were once thought to be essential to building a competitive AI model, with startups and big tech firms alike scrambling to get their hands on any available. But DeepSeek turned that on its head, sidestepping the rules by using Nvidia's less performant H800s to build the latest model and showing that the chip export controls were not the chokehold DC intended.
They were able to take whatever hardware they were trained on, but use it way more efficiently.
But just who's behind DeepSeek anyway? Despite its breakthrough, very, very little is known about its lab and its founder, Liang Wenfeng. According to Chinese media reports, DeepSeek was born out of a Chinese hedge fund called High Flyer Quant that manages about $8 billion in assets. The mission on its developer site, it reads simply, unravel the mystery of AGI with curiosity. Answer the essential question with long-termism. The leading American AI startups, meanwhile, OpenAI and Anthropic, they have detailed charters and constitutions that lay out their principles and their founding missions, lengthy sections on AI safety and responsibility. Despite several attempts to reach someone at DeepSeek, we never got a response.
How did they actually assemble this talent? How did they assemble all the hardware? How did they assemble the data to do all this? We don't know. And it's never been publicized, and hopefully we can learn that.
But the mystery brings into sharp relief just how urgent and complex the AI face-off against China has become. Because it's not just DeepSeek. Other more well-known Chinese AI models have carved out positions in the race with limited resources as well. Kai-Fu Lee, he's one of the leading AI researchers in China, formerly leading Google's operations there. Now his startup, 01.ai, it's attracting attention, becoming a unicorn just 8 months after founding and bringing in almost $14 million in revenue in 2024.
The thing that shocks my friends in the Silicon Valley is not just our performance, but that we trained the model with only $3 million. And GPT-4 was trained by 80 to 100 million.
Trained with just $3 million. Alibaba's QN, meanwhile, cut costs by as much as 85% on its large language models in a bid to attract more developers and signaling that the race is on. China's breakthrough undermines the lead that our AI labs were once thought to have. In early 2024, former Google CEO Eric Schmidt, he predicted China was 2 to 3 years behind the US in AI. But now, Schmidt is singing a different tune. Here he is on ABC's This Week.
Well, I used to think we were a couple of years ahead of China, but China has caught up in the last 6 months in a way that is remarkable. The fact of the matter is that a couple of the Chinese programs, one, for example, is called DeepSeek, looks like they've caught up.
It raises major questions about just how wide OpenAI's moat really is. Back when OpenAI released ChatGPT to the world in November of 2022, it was unprecedented and uncontested. Now the company faces not only the international competition from Chinese models, but fierce domestic competition from Google's Gemini, Anthropic's Claude, and Meta's open source Llama model. And now the game has changed. The widespread availability of powerful open source models allows developers to skip the demanding, capital-intensive steps of building and training models themselves. Now they can build on top of existing models, making it significantly easier to jump to the frontier, that is the front of the race, with a smaller budget and a smaller team.
In the last 2 weeks, AI research teams have really opened their eyes and have become way more ambitious on what's possible with a lot less capital. So previously, to get to the frontier, you would have to think about hundreds of millions of dollars of investment and perhaps $1 billion of investment. What DeepSeek has now done here in Silicon Valley is it's opened our eyes to what you can actually accomplish with 10, 15, 20, $30 million.
It also means any company like OpenAI that claims the frontier today could lose it tomorrow. That's how DeepSeek was able to catch up so quickly. It started building on the existing frontier of AI, its approach focusing on iterating on existing technology rather than reinventing the wheel.
They can take a really good big model and use a process called distillation. And what distillation is basically you use a very large model to help your small model get smart at the thing that you want it to get smart at. And that's actually very cost efficient.
It closed the gap by using available data sets, applying innovative tweaks, and leveraging existing models. So much so that DeepSeek's model has run into an identity crisis. It's convinced that it's ChatGPT. When you ask it directly, what model are you? DeepSeek responds, I'm an AI language model created by OpenAI, specifically based on the GPT-4 architecture. Leading OpenAI CEO Sam Altman to post in a thinly veiled shot at DeepSeek just days after the model was released, it's relatively easy to copy something that you know works. It's extremely hard to do something new, risky, and difficult when you don't know if it will work. But that's not exactly what DeepSeek did. It emulated GPT by leveraging OpenAI's existing outputs and architecture principles while quietly introducing its own enhancements, really blurring the line between itself and ChatGPT. It all puts pressure on a closed source leader like OpenAI to justify its costlier model as more and potentially nimbler competitors emerge.
Everybody copies everybody in this field. You can say Google did the transformer first, it's not OpenAI, and OpenAI just copied it. Google built the first large language models. They didn't productize it, but OpenAI did it in a productized way. So you can say all this in many ways. It doesn't matter.
So if everyone is copying one another, it raises the question, is massive spend on individual LLMs even a good investment anymore? Now, no one has as much at stake as OpenAI. The startup raised over $6 billion in its last funding round alone. But the company has yet to turn a profit. And with its core business centered on building the models, it's much more exposed than companies like Google and Amazon, who have cloud and ad businesses bankrolling their spend. For OpenAI, reasoning will be key. A model that thinks before it generates a response, going beyond pattern recognition to analyze, draw logical conclusions, and solve really complex problems. For now, the startup's O1 reasoning model, it's still cutting edge, but for how long?
Researchers at Berkeley showed that they could build a reasoning model for $450 just last week. So you can actually create these models that do thinking for much, much less. You don't need those huge amounts to pre-train the model. So I think the game is shifting.
It means that staying on top may require as much creativity as capital. DeepSeek's breakthrough also comes at a very tricky time for the AI darling, just as OpenAI is moving to a for-profit model and facing unprecedented brain drain. Can it raise more money at ever higher valuations if the game is changing? As Shamath Palihapitiya puts it, let me say the quiet part out loud. AI model building is a money trap. Those chip restrictions from the US government, they were intended to slow down the race, to keep American tech on American ground, to stay ahead in the race.
What we want to do is we want to keep it in this country. China is a competitor and others are competitors.
So instead, the restrictions might have been just what China needed.
Necessity is the mother of invention. Because they had to go figure out workarounds, they actually ended up building something a lot more efficient.
It's really remarkable the amount of progress they've made with as little capital as it's taken them to make that progress.
It drove them to get creative, with huge implications. DeepSeek is an open source model, meaning that developers have full access and they can customize its weights or fine-tune it to their liking.
It's known that once open source is caught up or improved over closed source software, all developers migrate to that.
But key is that it's also inexpensive. The lower the cost, the more attractive it is for developers to adopt.
The bottom line is our inference cost is 10 cents per million tokens. And that's 1/30th of what the typical comparable model charges.
And where's it going?
The 10 cents would lead to building apps for much lower costs. So if you wanted to build a U.com or Perplexity or some other app, you can either pay OpenAI $4.40 per million tokens, or if you have our model, it costs you just 10 cents.
It could mean that the prevailing model in global AI may be open source. As organizations and nations come around to the idea that collaboration and decentralization, those things can drive innovation faster and more efficiently than proprietary closed ecosystems. A cheaper, more efficient, widely adopted open source model from China, that could lead to a major shift in dynamics.
That's more dangerous because then they get to own the mind share, the ecosystem.
In other words, the adoption of a Chinese open source model at scale, that could undermine US leadership while embedding China more deeply into the fabric of global tech infrastructure.
There's always like a point where open source can stop being open source too, right? So the licenses are very favorable today, but if
could close it.
Exactly, if over time, they can always change the license. So it's important that we actually have people here in America building, and that's why Meta is so important.
Another consequence of China's AI breakthrough is giving its Communist Party control of the narrative. AI models built in China, they're forced to adhere to a certain set of rules set by the state. They must embody core socialist values. Studies have shown that models created by Tencent and Alibaba, they will censor historical events like Tiananmen Square, deny human rights abuse, and filter criticism of Chinese political leaders.
That contest is about whether we're going to have democratic AI informed by democratic values built to serve democratic purposes, or we're going to end up with autocratic AI.
If developers really begin to adopt these models en masse because they're more efficient, that could have a serious ripple effect, trickle down to even consumer-facing AI applications, and influence how trustworthy those AI-generated responses from chatbots really are.
And there's really only 2 countries right now in the world that can build this at scale, and that is the US and China. And so, the consequences, the stakes in and around this are just enormous.
Enormous stakes, enormous consequences, and hanging in the balance, America's lead. For a topic so complex and new, we turn to an expert who's actually building in the space and model agnostic. Perplexity co-founder and CEO Aravind Srinivas, who you heard from throughout our piece, he sat down with me for more than 30 minutes to discuss DeepSeek and its implications, as well as Perplexity's roadmap. We think it's worth listening to that whole conversation, so here it is.
So first, I want to know what the stakes are. Describe the AI race between China and the US and what's at stake.
Okay, so first of all, China has a lot of disadvantages in competing with the US. Number one is the fact that they don't get access to all the hardware that we have access to here. So they're kind of working with lower end GPUs than us. It's almost like working with the previous generation GPUs scrappily. And the fact that the bigger models tend to be more smarter naturally puts them at disadvantage. But the flip side of this is that necessity is the mother of invention. Because they had to go figure out workarounds, they actually ended up building something a lot more efficient. It's like saying, hey, look, you guys really got to get a top-notch model, and I'm not going to give you resources, and then figure out something, right? Unless it's mathematically possible to prove that it's impossible to do so, you can always try to come up with something more efficient. But that is likely to make them come up with a more efficient solution than America. And of course, they've open sourced it, so we can still adopt something like that here. But that kind of talent they're building to do that will become an edge for them over time, right? The leading open source model in America is Meta's Llama family. It's really good. It's kind of like a model that you can run on a computer. But even though it got pretty close to GPT-4 and Sonnet at the time of its release, the model that was closest in quality was the giant 405B, not the 70B that you could run on your computer. And so there was still not a small, cheap, fast, efficient open source model that rivaled the most powerful closed models from OpenAI and Anthropic. Nothing from America, nothing from Mistral AI either. And then these guys come out with a crazy model that's 10x cheaper in API pricing than GPT-4o and 15x cheaper than Sonnet, I believe. Really fast, 60 tokens per second, and pretty much equal or better in some benchmarks and worse in some others, but roughly in that ballpark of 4O's quality. And they did it all with approximately just 2048 H800 GPUs, which is actually equivalent to somewhere around 1500 or 1000, 1500 H100 GPUs. That's 20 to 30x lower than the amount of GPUs that GPT-4 is usually trained on. They roughly $5 million in total compute budget. They did it with so little money and such an amazing model, gave it away for free, wrote a technical paper, and definitely it makes us all question if we have the equivalent of Doge for model training, this is an example of that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Efficiency.
Yeah.
Is what you're getting at. So fraction of the price,
Yeah.
fraction of the time,
Yeah.
dumbed down GPUs essentially.
Yeah.
What was your surprise when you understood what they had done?
So my surprise was that when I actually went through the technical paper, the amount of clever solutions they came up with First of all, they train a mixture of experts model. It's not that easy to train. There's a lot of the main reason people find it difficult to catch up with OpenAI, especially in the MOE architecture, is that there's a lot of irregular loss spikes. The numerics are not stable. So often you got to restart the training checkpoint again, and a lot of infrastructure needs to be built for that. And they came up with very clever solutions to balance that without adding additional hacks. And they also figured out floating point 8-bit training, at least for some of the numerics. And they cleverly figured out which has to be in higher precision, which has to be in lower precision. To my knowledge, I think floating point 8 training is not that well understood. I think most of the training in America is still running in FP16, maybe OpenAI, and some people are trying to explore that, but it's pretty difficult to get it right. So because necessity is a mother of invention, because they don't have that much memory, that many GPUs, they figured out a lot of numerical stability stuff that makes their training work. And they claimed in the paper that for majority of the training was stable, which means what? They can always rerun those training runs again and on more data or better data. And then it only trained for 60 days. So it's pretty amazing.
Safe to say you were surprised.
So I was definitely surprised. Usually the wisdom, or I wouldn't say wisdom, the myth is that Chinese are just good at copying. So if we stop writing research papers in America, if we stop describing the details of our infrastructure or architecture and stop open sourcing, they're not going to be able to catch up. But the reality is some of the details in DeepSeek v3 are so good that I wouldn't be surprised if Meta took a look at it and incorporated some of that in Llama 4. Them. Right? I wouldn't necessarily say copy. It's all sharing science, engineering. But the point is it's changing. It's not like China is copycat. They're also innovating.
We don't know exactly the data that it was trained on, right? Yeah. Even though it's open source. We know some of the ways and things it was trained on, but not everything.
Correct.
And there's this idea that it was trained on public ChatGPT outputs, which would mean it just was copied, but you're saying it goes beyond that. There's real innovation in that.
Yeah, look, I mean, they've trained it on 14.8 trillion tokens. The internet has so much ChatGPT. If you actually go to any LinkedIn post or X post now, most of the comments are written by AI. You can just see it. People are just trying to write. In fact, even within X, there's a Grok tweet enhancer, or in LinkedIn there's an AI enhancer, or in Google Docs and Word, there are AI tools to rewrite your stuff. So if you do something there and copy paste it somewhere on the internet, it's naturally going to have some elements of a ChatGPT-like training, right? And there's a lot of people who don't even bother to strip away that I'm a language model part. So they just paste it somewhere, and it's very difficult to control for this. I think XAI has spoken about this too. So I wouldn't disregard their technical accomplishment just because for some prompts who are you, or which model are you, it responds like that. It doesn't even matter in my opinion.
For a long time, we thought, I don't know if you agreed with us, China was behind in AI. What does this do to that race? Can we say that China is catching up, or has it caught up?
I mean, if we say that Meta is catching up to OpenAI and Anthropic, if you make that claim, then the same claim can be made for China catching up to America. There are a lot of papers from China that have tried to replicate O1. In fact, I saw more papers from China after O1 announcement that tried to replicate it than from America. And the amount of compute DeepSeek has access to is roughly similar to what PhD students in the US have access to. By the way, this is not meant to criticize others. Even for ourselves, for Perplexity, we decided not to train models because we thought it's a very expensive thing.
Yeah.
And we thought there's no way to catch up with the rest. But
will you incorporate DeepSeek into Perplexity?
We already are beginning to use it. I think they have an API, and we're also they have open source away, so we can host it ourselves too. And it's good to try to start using that because it actually allows us to do a lot of the things at lower cost. But what I'm kind of thinking is beyond that, which is okay, if these guys actually could train such a great model with this, good team and there's no excuse anymore for companies in the US, including ourselves, to like not try to do something like that.
You hear a lot in public from a lot of, thought leaders in generative AI, both on the research side, on the entrepreneurial side, like Elon Musk and others say that China can't catch up. Like the stakes are too big, the geopolitical stakes. Whoever dominates AI is going to kind of dominate the economy, dominate the world. It's been talked about in those massive terms. Are you worried about what China proved it was able to do?
Firstly, I don't know if Elon ever said China can't catch up. I'm not aware.
Just the threat of China. He's only identified the threat of letting China. And, Sam Altman has said similar things. We can't let China win the AI race.
It's all, I think you got to decouple what someone like Sam says to like what is in his self-interest, right? Look, I think my point is like whatever you did to not let them catch up didn't even matter. They ended up catching up anyway.
Necessity is the mother of invention,
exactly.
Like you said.
And it's actually, what's more dangerous than trying to do all the things to like not let them catch up and like, all the stuff is what's more dangerous is they have the best open source model and all the American developers are building on that.
Right.
That's more dangerous because then they get to own the mind share, the ecosystem. If the entire American AI ecosystem, look, in general, it's known that once open source is caught up or improved over closed source software, all developers migrate to that. It's historically known, right?
When Llama was being built and becoming more widely used, there was this question, should we trust Zuckerberg? But now the question is, should we trust China? That's a very
You should trust
different...
open source. That's the, like, it's not about who, is it Zuckerberg or is it...
Does it matter then if it's Chinese, if it's open source?
Look, it doesn't matter in the sense that you still have full control. You run it as your own, set of weights on your own computer. You are in charge of the model. But it's not a great look for our own talent to rely on software built by others. Even if it's open source, there's always a point where open source can stop being open source too, right? So the licenses are very favorable today, but
you could close it.
Exactly. If over time, they can always change the license. So it's important that we actually have people here in America building, and that's why Meta is so important. I still think Meta will build a better model than DeepSeek v3 and open source it, and what they'll call it Llama 4 or 3 point something, doesn't matter. But I think what is more key is that we don't try to focus all our energy on banning them and stopping them, instead just try to outcompete and win them. That's just the American way of doing things. Just be better.
And it feels like there's, we hear a lot more about these Chinese companies who are developing in a similar way, a lot more efficiently, a lot more cost effectively, right?
Yeah. Again, look, it's hard to fake scarcity, right? If you raise 10 billion and you're decided to spend 80% of it on a compute cluster, it's hard for you to come up with the exact same solution that someone with 5 million would do. And there's no need to sort of berate those who are putting more money. They're trying to do it as fast as they can.
When we say open source, there's so many different versions. Some people criticize Meta for not publishing everything. And even DeepSeek itself isn't totally transparent.
Sure. Yeah, you can go to the limits of open source and say, I should exactly be able to replicate your training run. But first of all, how many people even have the resources to do that? And compare, I think the amount of detail they've shared in the technical report, actually Meta did that too, by the way. Meta's Llama 3.3 technical report is incredibly detailed and very great for science. So the amount of details these people are sharing is already a lot more than what the other companies are doing right now.
When you think about how much it costs DeepSeek to do this, less than $6 million, think about what OpenAI has spent to develop GPT models. What does that mean for the closed source model, ecosystem trajectory, momentum? What does it mean for OpenAI?
I mean, it's very clear that we'll have an open source version of 4.0 or even better than that and much cheaper than that, open source, completely this year.
Made by OpenAI?
Probably not. Most likely not. And I don't think they care if it's not made by them. I think they've already moved to a new paradigm called the O1 family of models, Look there. I can't like Ilya Sutskever came and said pre-training is at a wall, right? So I mean, he didn't exactly use the word, but he clearly said the age of pre-training is over.
Many people have said that,
right? So that doesn't mean scaling is hit a wall. I think we're scaling on different dimensions now. The amount of time model spends thinking at test time, reinforcement learning, like trying to like make the model okay, if it doesn't know what to do for a new prompt, it'll go and reason and collect data and interact with the world, use a bunch of tools. I think that's where things are headed. And I feel like OpenAI is more focused on that right now.
Yeah. Instead of just the bigger, better model,
correct.
Reasoning capacities. But didn't you say that DeepSeek is likely to turn their attention to reasoning?
100%. I think they will. And that's why I'm pretty excited about what they'll produce next.
I guess then my question is sort of what's OpenAI's moat now?
Well, I still think that no one else has produced a system similar to the O1 yet, exactly. I know that like there's debates about whether O1 is actually worth it. On maybe a few prompts it's really better, but like most of the times it's not producing any differentiated output from Sonnet. But at least the results they showed in O3 where they had like competitive coding performance and almost like an AI software engineer level.
Isn't it just a matter of time though before the internet is filled with reasoning data that DeepSeek?
Again, it's possible. Nobody knows yet.
Yeah.
So until it's done, it's still uncertain, right?
Right.
So maybe that uncertainty is their mode, that like no one else has the same reasoning capability yet. But by end of this year, will there be multiple players even in the reasoning arena? I absolutely think so.
So are we seeing the commoditization of large language models?
I think we'll see a similar trajectory, just like how in pre-training and like post-training, that sort of system 4.0 getting commoditized, where this year will be a lot more commoditization there. I think the reasoning kind of models will go through a similar trajectory, where in the beginning, one or two players really know how to do it, but over time, like...
And who knows, right? Because OpenAI could make another advancement to focus on.
Correct.
But right now, reasoning is their mode.
But by the way, if advancements keep happening again and again and again, like, I think the meaning of the word advancement also loses some of its value, right?
Totally. Even now, it's very difficult, right? Because there's pre-training advancements.
Yeah.
And then we've moved into a different phase.
Yeah, so what is guaranteed to happen is whatever models exist today, that level of reasoning, that level of multimodal capability in like 5 to 10x cheaper models, open source, all that's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. What is unclear is if something like a model that reasons at test time will be extremely cheap enough that like we can just all run it on our phones. I think that's not clear to me yet.
It feels like so much of the landscape has changed with what DeepSeek was able to prove. Could you call it China's ChatGPT moment?
Possible. I mean, I think it certainly probably gave them a lot of confidence that like, we're not really behind, and no matter what you do to restrict our compute, like we can always figure out some workarounds. And I'm sure the team feels pumped about the results.
How does this change like the investment landscape? The hyperscalers that are spending tens of billions of dollars a year on CapEx have just ramped it up huge, and OpenAI and Anthropic that are raising billions of dollars for GPUs, essentially. But what DeepSeek told us is you don't necessarily need that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's very clear that they're gonna go even harder on reasoning because they understand that like whatever they were building in the previous 2 years is getting extremely cheap, that it doesn't make sense to go justify raising that amount of capital.
Is the spending proposition the same? Do they need the same amount of high-end GPUs, or can you reason using the lower-end ones that DeepSeek has?
Again, it's hard to say no until proven it's not. But I guess like in the spirit of moving fast, you would want to use the high-end chips, and you would want to like move faster than your competitors. I think like the best talent still wants to work in the team that made it happen first. There's always some glory to like who did this actually, like who's the real pioneer. versus who's the fast follow, right?
That was like kind of like Sam Altman's tweet, kind of veiled response to what DeepSeek has been able to. He kind of implied that they just copied and anyone can copy, right?
Yeah, but then you can always say that like everybody copies everybody in this field. You can say Google did the transformer first. It's not OpenAI, and OpenAI just copied it. Google built the first large language models. They didn't productize it, but OpenAI did it in a productized way. So you can say all this in many ways. It doesn't matter.
I remember asking you, being like, why don't you want to build the model?
Yeah,
that's,
I know.
That's the glory. And a year later, just 1 year later, you look very, very smart to not engage in that extremely expensive race that has become so competitive. And you kind of have this lead now in what everyone wants to see now, which is like real world applications, killer applications of generative AI. Talk a little bit about like that decision and how that's sort of guided you and where you see Perplexity going from here.
Look, 1 year ago, I don't even think we had something like, this is what, like 2024 beginning, right? I feel like we didn't even have something like Sonnet 3.5.
Right.
We had GPT-4, I believe, and it was kind of nobody else was able to catch up to it.
Yeah.
But there was no multimodal, nothing. And my sense was like, okay, if people with way more resources and way more talent cannot catch up, it's pretty difficult to play that game. So let's play a different game. Anyway, people want to use these models, and there's one use case of asking questions and getting accurate answers with sources, with real-time information, accurate information. There's still a lot of work there to do outside the model and making sure the product works reliably, keep scaling it up to usage, keep building custom UIs. There's just a lot of work to do, and we would focus on that. And we would benefit from all the tailwinds of models getting better and better. That's essentially what happened. In fact, I would say Sonnet 3.5 made our product so good in the sense that if you use Sonnet 3.5 as the model choice within Perplexity, it's very difficult to find a hallucination. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it dramatically reduced the rate of hallucinations, which meant the problem of question answering, asking a question, getting an answer, doing a fact checks, research, going and asking anything out there, because almost all the information is on the web, was such a big unlock. And that helped us grow 10x over the course of the year in terms of usage.
And you've made huge strides in terms of users. And, we hear on CNBC a lot, like big investors who are huge fans.
Yeah.
Jensen Huang himself, right?
Yeah,
he mentioned it in his keynote the other night.
He's a pretty regular user, actually. He's not just saying it. He's actually a pretty regular user.
So a year ago, we weren't even talking about monetization because you guys were just so new and you wanted to, get yourselves out there and build some scale. But now you are looking at things like that, increasingly an ad model, right?
Yeah, we're experimenting with it. I know like there's some controversy on like why should we do ads, whether you can have a truthful answer engine despite having ads. And in my opinion, we've been pretty proactively thoughtful about it, where we said, okay, as long as the answer is always accurate, unbiased, and not corrupted by someone's like advertising budget, only you get to see some sponsored questions, and even the answers to those sponsored questions are not influenced by them. And questions are also like, not picked in a way where it's manipulative. Sure, there's some things that the advertiser also wants, which is they want you to know about their brand and they want you to know the best parts of their brand. Just like how you go and if you're introducing yourself to someone, you want them to see the best parts of you, right? So that's all there, but you still don't have to click on a sponsored question. You can ignore it, and we are only charging them CPM right now. So we ourselves are not even incentivized to make you click yet. So I think considering all this, we're actually trying to get it right long term. Instead of going the Google way of forcing you to click on links.
I remember when people were talking about the commoditization of models a year ago, and you thought, oh, it was controversial, but now it's not controversial. It's kind of like that's happening.
Yeah.
And you keeping your eye on that is smart.
By the way, we benefit a lot from model commoditization, except we also need to figure out something to offer to the paid users, like a more sophisticated research agent that can do like multi-step reasoning, go and like do like 15 minutes worth of searching and give you like a analysis, an analyst type of answer. All that's going to come, all that's going to stay in the product, nothing changes there. But there's a ton of questions every free user asks day-to-day basis that needs to be quick, fast answers. Like it shouldn't be slow. And all that will be free, whether you like it or not. It has to be free. That's what people are used to. And that means like figuring out a way to make that free traffic also monetizable.
So you're not trying to change user habits, but it's interesting because you are kind of trying to teach new habits to advertisers. They can't have everything that they have in a Google 10 blue links search. What's the response been from them so far? Are they willing to accept some of the trade-offs?
Yeah, I mean, that's why they're trying stuff. Like Intuit is working with us, and then there's many other brands, Dell, like all these people are working with us to test, right? They're also excited about look, everyone knows that like whether they like it or not, 5 to 10 years from now, most people are going to be asking AIs most of the things and not on the traditional search engine. Everybody understands that. So everybody wants to be early adopters of the new platforms, new UX, and learn from it and build things together. Not like they're not viewing it as like, okay, you guys go figure out everything else and then we'll come later.
I'm smiling because it goes back perfectly to the point you made when you first sat down today, which is necessity is the mother of all invention, right? And that's what advertisers are essentially looking at. They're saying this field is changing. We have to learn to adapt with it. Okay, Aravind, I took up so much of your time. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Hey Digit, take the box with the heaviest animal and move it to Tower 4. This is Digit, a robot who sort of looks like a person, hence the name humanoid robot. Technically, these are called bipedal humanoid robots using semantic intelligence. It's able to interpret commands from people and then make its own decisions about how to act. So the goal is for him to be able to interpret normal human language, to say, hey, I need you to pick this box up. Help me out in this instance. Is that where you see this going?
Yeah, and I think it will generally be probably less of a, I need you to do this one thing for me, and more of a, do this for me forever in the corner of the facility.
Robots like this one are catching the attention and billions of investment dollars from big tech companies like Amazon, Google, Nvidia, and Microsoft. Elon Musk is betting the future of Tesla on these machines.
As you see Optimus develop, it's really going to transform the world, I think, to a degree even greater than the cars.
Some also argue robots like Digit can solve the world's labor crisis, filling jobs that are too dangerous or that people simply don't want. They may even replace an aging workforce as people around the world have fewer kids.
Today in manufacturing, we're short about 300,000 people, and it's something very similar in warehousing and logistics. So we're somewhere around 600,000-700,000 jobs we can't fill.
The idea of robots isn't exactly new.
Here I am, sir.
So why all the sudden attention? The big driver, artificial intelligence. These bots have seen quantum leaps in what they're capable of in just the past few years, thanks to AI.
Generative AI is really a key unlock overall for what you can get a robot to do, let alone a humanoid robot.
Robotics is where AI meets reality.
We are really at the cusp of solving one of the grand challenges of humanity that'll change labor forever.
There is probably a need in the future once the humanoids get a bit more clever, a bit more perhaps autonomy. But until that point, I think the market will be fairly limited to PR spectacles.
It all sounds great, but will we ever trust robots working in our houses, schools, and nursing homes? Will they ever be safe enough? And how lifelike is too lifelike? And how should the US think about global adversaries building similar fleets of humanoids? CNBC explores the rise of these AI-driven humanoids and if they're really a cure-all for our global workforce problems or if this is another tech bubble. This hardware has been around for decades. Companies like Boston Dynamics, Honda, Sony, and others have wowed the public with early versions of these robots.
Why would we want humanoids? The prevailing sort of answer has been the world is built to be occupied by humans.
So we want robots that are versatile, that can do a wide range of things. Then having it adopt the humanoid form factor always made a lot of sense.
Recent leaps in artificial intelligence have resulted in leaps for robotics. The data that they use to train these robots, it's based in real-world scenarios. Now a robot can be trained the same way a human is.
We have this technology called teleoperation. The person does the thing 200 times. We record all that data, and then we use that data to train these models. And the AI models are very similar to the GPT-style generative AI models. You feed in the 200 trajectories, and the system learns how the task is being done, and then the robot will do the task autonomously.
If I go into a new space, I'm now not looking at spending months trying to code that problem. I can potentially just generate it straight out of Gen AI and be able to have Digit interact with new objects and in new environments without having to develop it all.
AI models require massive quantities of data to train off of, and this is no different.
If you show the robot enough things, it starts to be able to do things that it hasn't been shown before.
Big tech is very interested in the big potential this technology promises.
If you're going to do AI at the frontier, you need to be partnered with Microsoft or Nvidia or Google or one of the big players. There's just no other way. They have resources that nobody else has, even governments.
Nvidia's been a great partner up until this point. We're using everything from their hardware to their simulation, and then recently have started working with them on foundation models as well.
One of this industry's biggest proponents is Elon Musk. He's made some bold predictions that Tesla's robot, Optimus, could propel it to a $25 trillion market cap, and that it will amount to a majority of Tesla's long-term value, with demand as high as 10 to 20 billion units.
Tesla is arguably the world's biggest robotics company because our cars are like semi-sentient robots on wheels. And with the full self-driving computer and all the neural nets, it kind of makes sense to put that onto a humanoid form. And it's intended to be friendly, of course, and navigate through a world built for humans and eliminate dangerous, repetitive, and boring tasks.
Musk isn't alone in believing humanoid robots could change the world. Investors are pouring millions into startups, with the market expected to grow to $38 billion by 2035.
The funding that has gone into some of these companies has been absolutely huge. And I think that kind of the parallel with the AI funding.
This is the biggest market in the world. I mean, effectively, this has the potential to change the way we live and work pretty dramatically.
Humanoid robots are closer to being a real part of our workforce than you might think. Some companies are already deploying them in factories and warehouses. Tesla claims it has 2 Optimus humanoid robots in its factory. During Tesla's 2024 first quarter earnings call, Musk said he believes Optimus will be performing tasks in Tesla's factories by the end of the year, and that it could start selling the robot to outside customers by the end of 2025. At the company's 2024 Investor Day in June, Musk predicted it could have over 1,000 or a few thousand robots working at Tesla next year.
Musk saying that Optimus will be bigger than the cars. So I presume that means that they are spending huge amounts of this. I wouldn't underestimate them.
Digit, created by Oregon-based Agility Robotics, is helping Amazon in early-stage testing at its Sumner, Washington Fulfillment Center and Innovation Lab.
We've been working with them recycling totes.
The arms are capable of handling a wide variety of different payloads, up to about 33-ish pounds.
Agility says it plans to keep expanding the scope of work that Digit is capable of.
We envision an app store for robots out in the future, where if you need a tote recycling app, you can go into the app store and download that onto your robot.
And according to the company, there is plenty of demand. Agility is building a factory in Salem, Oregon to keep up with orders.
We call it RoboFab. We'll be online this summer. In a few years, have a capacity of about 10,000 robots per year.
And where will those go for the most part?
To many, many customers, but largely initially in the logistics, warehousing space. The next big market we see is automotive, retail, and then eventually into markets like healthcare.
Several other startups are developing similar humanoid robots. Sanctuary AI, launched in 2018 in Vancouver, Canada, unveiled its latest robot last year. Phoenix, a 5'7" robot capable of lifting up to 55 pounds. It looks a bit different from other humanoid designs, trading its legs for wheels.
Robots with legs, the upper body, including the hands, have to be very weak and light. So instead of doing that, we put our product on a wheeled base. And because we made that trade-off, we can build very powerful, very precise, very fast motors in the upper body.
The company deployed early iterations of its robot with Canadian Tire, completing front and back of store tasks such as picking and packing merchandise.
Robots were asked to do everything from greeting people when they come through the door to actually putting things on trucks.
Sanctuary says it's close to releasing its 8th generation robot in the next few months and has partnered with automotive manufacturer Magna to help build its robots at scale. Apptronik started in 2016 as a spin-out from the Human-Centered Robotics Lab at the University of Texas at Austin. It began with an initial project to help NASA build a generalized humanoid robot. The company says it's now on its 8th version of a humanoid.
All of that has culminated in building the robot that we essentially always dreamed of building, a robot called Apollo, which is a mass manufacturable commercial humanoid robot.
With a max payload of 55 pounds and a swappable 4-hour battery, Apollo is designed to help support logistics and manufacturing, to start with retail as its next focus.
We've got to prove out sort of these simpler tasks, but my dream is for Apollo hopefully to be ready in time to help my parents, hopefully to help me as I get old.
The company says it has deployed Apollo in pilots with Mercedes-Benz, GXO, and others.
We've started with pretty simple tasks, things like moving boxes or moving cases from one place to another. What we're moving into is doing more dexterity and more end-to-end tasks, and then hope to be in full commercial launch by the end of next year.
It's no wonder tech companies have taken notice. Some Wall Street analysts predict these robots are the next must-have device, not unlike smartphones or EVs, but they also say such robots would be vital for manufacturing and dangerous work, but they would also help with elderly care and fill in labor shortages in factories. There's already too few workers to fill all of the world's manufacturing jobs. It's an estimated shortage of 500,000 people, and by 2030, Goldman Sachs thinks that will grow to a shortage of 2 million workers.
Imagine I could give you a labor force that costs the price of electricity, a few cents an hour per worker. And they were equipped with the kinds of general intelligence that you might imagine comes like in science fiction. There's going to be things that you think of that will dramatically improve your life, no matter who you are.
We've only automated 10% of automotive manufacturing. If we can automate a much higher degree, it would dramatically change the economy.
We have the ability to add new tools. You can imagine if you needed to put a rivet into a car or something, you could actually have the screw produced in the hand.
But robots taking human jobs can be a contentious topic. What would you tell those people who, there are certain jobs that might be lost as a result of this?
Actually, we've heard from some of those people, and what their jobs start to evolve into is the manager of the robot fleet.
They can be deployed in coal mines, in fires, for rescue efforts, where it might not be as safe for a human being.
There are just some jobs that people don't want. Proponents say a humanoid can help fill those.
There's about 10 million open jobs in the United States alone. We could build and maintain 10 million of the robots that we're talking about without touching a single job.
If you have to lift sort of 55 pounds somewhere between 50 and 100 times an hour, that's a serious workout. So we're taking these dirty, dull, and dangerous jobs first.
How far away are we from Digit doing your laundry?
That's probably more along the lines of, a decade or more.
Is there a kill switch, for lack of a better term?
There is a kill switch. It's
the big red button over there?
The big red button over there.
These are 140 pounds. They have a lot of torque in their hands and arms and legs. And so you have to be very conscious of the situation when robots are interfacing with humans.
The biggest sort of short-term obstacle we have is safety. The UN has sort of put together a committee that's called AI for Good, which is basically coming up with policy recommendations at a UN level for how should countries think about AI and also think about robotics.
for Agility's deployment of Digit, its robots operate away from human workers for safety reasons.
So right now, Digit is non-collaborative, and we're working to what's called collaborative safety, which is being able to formally verify, according to international standards, that Digit is safe to be in close proximity to a person.
We have very tight safety regulations today. And then eventually OSHA is the workplace safety organization that actually has to approve any deployment. So it's very regulated to make sure that we don't get bad accidents.
Another big roadblock, the cost. Humanoid robots are expensive, complex pieces of machinery. For them to go mainstream, that's going to have to change.
It's really expensive to even try to do this. And you have to have investors who are willing to take risks because, nobody's done this before.
Elon Musk came out with this idea that it should cost less than $20,000, and that would be a level where mass adoption would be possible. I think we'll have to wait quite a few years, probably a decade at least.
Agility says its robots can be purchased upfront with an additional software as a service fee or a bundled monthly fee for robots as a service.
As long as they have the robot, we help maintain it, take care of it, keep the software updated, and they just pay on a monthly basis.
What does one of these robots cost? How should people think about it? Is it like buying a car or a boat?
I'd say it's like buying an expensive car, but the costs are coming down very, very quickly.
While the US has seen activity in humanoid robots explode, China is giving the West a run for its money. It already dominates the industry, surpassing Japan in 2013 as the world's largest installer of industrial robots, and now accounts for more than half of the global total.
China, the market is absolutely huge. For example, in mobile robots, it's the biggest in the world. The only other company in the West that has anything similar to the quantities that the companies have in China is Amazon. But Chinese companies are catching up fast.
If you just count the number of humanoid robots that have come onto the scene over the last year, about half of them are from Chinese companies.
Interestingly, you've seen companies like BYD also invest. There's a broader effort to get the capital into this industry in China.
One of China's biggest competitive advantages is cost.
They need to source these parts almost custom made. Being based in China, they're closer to the factories that can make these parts potentially at a lower cost.
Unitree in China, they came out with this $16,000 humanoid, which is a very exciting development, but what can the robot actually do? That's a huge question.
I think an interesting space to watch will be in the components once there are more standards and potentially the factories that have been making some of these components for the humanoid startups in China. They could also sell those parts overseas.
Competitiveness in this space is crucial for the US, which has been seeking to keep its edge over China as geopolitical tensions rise.
Even though the US invented the very first robot, 100% of all major industrial robots were produced outside of the US by foreign companies. I think of the humanoid race as effectively the next space race, and it has major implications for both national competitiveness and national security.
In terms of large economics, it is China versus the US. We need to make sure that the big applications for this are in the US and in Europe, because if it's not, then we're going to lose that arms race. This is a real arms race, and we better make sure we win it.
There are still very real roadblocks. Cost and safety are the biggest near-term issues. Finally, there's questions over how to regulate the space, similar to questions on how to regulate AI. Even the robot's biggest advocates say they want to put up guardrails and make sure those eventually working alongside humanoids aren't put in harm's way. But they're also competitive, and they want this industry to innovate with an ability to move quickly enough to keep up with rapid progress abroad.
This is really the beginning of a new industry. Think of this like the personal computer in the early 80s. It will have potentially bigger impacts than the personal computer. These robots are going to give us all back time.
Startups are becoming pawns in the mega cap game of chess. Microsoft absorbs inflection.
The big organizational change happening at Microsoft around AI.
Amazon consumes adept.
This startup was valued at more than $1 billion. Now, most of the company is now going to Amazon.
Google and character AI. 3 of the biggest tech companies swallowing 3 of the biggest startups in the AI world without actually acquiring them.
The reality is everywhere you look, we see rapid concentrations.
They're quelling competition, poaching top talent, and skirting scrutiny, while regulators are still playing checkers. I'm Deirdre Bosa, and this week on Tech Check, the AI M&A fakeout. Character AI was one of the most promising startups in the age of generative AI. Personalized AI.
How are thee? Let's get to the bottom of this.
Highly engaging. Loyal user base.
Somebody who sends one message today is active for, on average, 2 hours in that day.
$150 million in funding at $1 billion valuation.
Character.ai launched its software last September and has had more than 173 million visits last month, a 61% increase from March.
And a founder who pioneered generative AI.
When I got started working on these large language models and inventing this field, like in 2016 to 2018, like very few people were excited.
There was just one problem. The startup couldn't make money, and according to reports, it struggled to generate enough revenue from paid users.
Character AI, billion-dollar valuation, pre-revenue, very much feels like the 2010 App Store, where you gain a lot of users and kind of figure out the monetization later.
So it turned to a well-established money-printing megacap, Google, which was happy to cut a deal, especially since it was arguably more interested in the talent than the technology. Character AI co-founder Noam Shazir was an author of a groundbreaking paper that laid the foundation for today's age of AI. It would bring Shazir back to Google, along with a fifth of his employees, and license Character's technology without having to outright buy the startup in an acquisition.
Every person on earth is going to be inventing their own applications.
It's a playbook that skirts the regulatory crackdown on big tech dominance, provides an exit for AI startups struggling to make money, and allows megacaps to pick up the talent needed in the AI arms race.
There's a very small number of researchers, AI practitioners that operate at the frontier of the technology. There's probably only thousands right now. And the hyperscalers, the megacaps, want that talent, and they're looking to get it any way they can.
A playbook that Microsoft pioneered. In March, it inked an unusual deal with Inflection, a prominent AI startup with a chatbot to rival ChatGPT's. Again, not an outright acquisition, just a $650 million agreement that would allow Microsoft to use Inflection's AI models and hire away most of its staff, including founder Mustafa Suleyman, whom they put in charge of its entire AI unit.
He co-founded DeepMind back in 2010. That was later acquired by Google. In 2022, he co-founded a company called Inflection. He did that with Reid Hoffman.
In June, Amazon and Adept AI struck a deal. Amazon reportedly paid at least $330 million to license Adept's technology, with a $100 million retention bonus to employees who jumped ship.
A big cost center for these startups is GPUs, those chips, cloud computing. And what does Amazon have? They've got AWS, they've got the cloud computing side in spades. So if you're a startup and you're looking to partner with one of these companies or do some sort of licensing deal, you're going to look at one of the big tech companies, likely Amazon, Google, Microsoft.
For the mega cap and the startup employees who are hired away, it's win-win. The founders no longer feel pressured to monetize their business models. Being swallowed up by a highly profitable mega cap, that buys them time to build for the longer term.
As these founders are looking to scale their companies, they might see headwinds, any number of headwinds. And it could just be that at this point in time, the best home for them is, again, a mega cap.
And their cloud computing costs needed to develop Gen AI models running into the hundreds of millions of dollars, they get absorbed by the tech giants that own the infrastructure.
We definitely talk to founders that want to develop the best technologies and just have access to GPU resource and not fight for it. And I think that's why you've seen some funds spin up clusters of their own to give founders access.
For the mega caps, it's a quick and easy way to get the best talent in the field. And that was likely a motivation when Google purchased DeepMind back in 2014, an example of an all-out acquisition that is highly unlikely to get approved today. DeepMind was one of the most prestigious independent AI research labs a decade ago. Google was early and managed to acquire it before Gen AI was even on the radar of regulators. Today, though, AI is squarely in their crosshairs, and Gen AI the biggest arms race in tech. Gen AI aside, Apple, Google, Amazon, and Meta, they all have pending cases before the antitrust chiefs of the FTC and the DOJ. Google has already found itself on the losing end, with a federal court ruling it has a monopoly in the search market and now faces a potential breakup. Big tech might think they're outsmarting antitrust enforcers and sidestepping scrutiny, but they could be playing with fire. The regulators of today, they do have a few moves up their sleeves. They're more agile and aggressive than ever. The FTC has already opened an antitrust probe into Microsoft's deal with Inflection, investigating whether Microsoft structured that deal to gain control of the startup while also dodging review. And the agency has also launched an informal inquiry into the Amazon Adept deal. Even Congress has taken notice, with 3 U.S. senators calling for an investigation.
Lena Khan and others have looked at it. It's not that there's been wholesale mergers of these things, but even the partnerships unto themselves.
Their main concern isn't just whether or not the acquisition happened on a technical level.
At this moment, AI is a nascent technology that could catalyze enormous growth and innovation. There is enormous opportunity here for a vibrant market. But we also see risk. We see risk of consolidation. We see risk of monopolization.
It's whether or not the act is ultimately anti-competitive, especially in a nascent, growing space where having competition is key to making sure that there's innovation instead of the same incumbent behemoths getting ever larger and more powerful. Because yes, mega caps, they aren't swallowing startups whole. They're leaving behind a shell of a company and some of its employees. Still functioning, but not competitive. Which also brings into sharp relief just who gets left holding the bag. On the surface, these deals seem like win-win, but there are employees and investors who are left behind. In the Adept deal, for example, Amazon only hired away the AI researchers, according to the New York Times. The teams working on product, sales, and other areas weren't so lucky. They don't reap any of the rewards that their former colleagues do, a new cushier gig at a proven big corporation, without the desperate search for viable revenue. Instead, they're left trying to find a way to piece together a new business without its top talent.
In a number of deals of this type, the remaining company still has access to the IP that's been created, and certainly enough resources as part of the transaction to continue to hire talent and build upon that IP.
Then there's the VC money that initially founded those startups. Those that backed Character, Adept, and Inflection, they're being made whole or almost whole through licensing deals, but it is a far cry from the returns they were looking for. Typically, VCs bet on bigger payoffs. A minimum 5 to 10 times rate of return is considered a benchmark for success. One insider who wanted to remain anonymous tells me that there could be more of these types of deals to come, noting that there are many more overvalued AI startups that have yet to find viable business models. Cohere, for example, is another still independent Gen AI darling that was recently valued at more than $5 billion. It reportedly has less than $25 million in annualized revenue. A lifeline from a megacap, that could be a welcome development as the pressure to monetize builds. But as regulators get wise to the pseudo acquisition, will big tech be willing to tempt them with more deals? Or will the AI unicorns be left to fend for themselves as the big get bigger? However it plays out, the AI M&A fakeout has changed the landscape for generative AI.